Okay, Jim Martin, and that's Martin.
Great. Now, during the '64 flood, where
Oh,
we
Jen,
work, yeah.
just a reminder on the island,
Oh yeah. So
because
I'll
we're
just remind
distracting
you.
back here.
Yeah.
To look at you.
Yeah, because they're trying to distract you.
Yes.
Stop it. um, so let's see. Oh, and also if you can answer in complete sentences, because we're going to edit me out.
All
So
right.
I ask a question just as if you have to tell somebody something without the whole
So if you
question.
say a location,
All right.
if she asks a location, you might want to answer with that location.
Okay.
Yeah. So what were you doing during the 1964 flood when the flood hit?
I was working for Division of Highways at the time. I was also a member of the National Guard Engineering Battalion here in Eureka. And that night, after I'd been out bowling, heard on the radio they were calling the National Guard unit up. So I reported out there immediately.
Where did you report at?
At the National Guard Armory out by the Sequoia Park.
Okay. And so you got called up right away. What did you end up doing for the National Guard?
I was a truck driver in what they call these 2.5-ton trucks, and ended up, we left early that first morning before daybreak and headed to Stafford at South Scotia. We were supposed to try to get into Pepperwood to rescue Mrs. Porter and Mrs. Van Noy from the Van Noy Hotel, but the water was too deep. So we stayed there at Stafford to get further instruction, and then the water kept coming up pretty fast. So people in the low-lying area there at Stafford come up and wanted help to move belongings, cars, and themselves out of there. So we worked there for a couple of hours moving people up to the store there at Stafford. And then eventually we headed back to Scotia, and just as we were coming across the South Scotia, the old bridge, the new bridge was building up debris, and that new bridge went out just shortly after we had got through.
So the old bridge, you came across on the old bridge and the new bridge got washed out?
New bridge got washed out because the steel truss of it was below the level of the deck of the old bridge, which had an overhead truss, and it ended up that bridge stayed. So we learned something from that and built the new bridge that went out, built the new one higher than the level of the 64 flood.
I bet you learned a whole lot of new levels that you had to do things at.
Yes.
In the '64 flood.
Yes, found that out with Division of Highways too, when we went back to replace and also build new sections of freeway. We had something, like a magic line that said, all right, 64 flood was at this level, and we'll try and get the, road above, the level of that.
So let's see, what else do we want to talk about? So you were also over at you had to deliver some diesel over to the fairgrounds. Tell about that story.
Yes, got a call, and they wanted me to take a deuce and a half and a 55-gallon drum of diesel over to Ferndale, and we crossed over Fern Bridge, and the water was still quite deep on the other side, so I found my way around through washouts and deep water. I found my way to the fairgrounds and pulled into the fairgrounds, and C. Joe Heinley was the director of emergency services there. And I walked in, he was on the radio, and he looked up and he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "I've got some diesel for your generator." I said, "I just came in from Fernbridge." And he said, "What?" And so right away, they wanted us to start hauling people out of Ferndale and bring them over to Fernbridge or Eureka area, and then to start hauling supplies in. So we got some more trucks and spent the whole day getting in.
I bet people were happy to get out of there.
And there was a lot of people that I knew when I was raised out of Pepperwood and Shively area, and there was a lot of people that here they were, trying to get out of Ferndale, and here I was there to, be able to help them transport them out.
Well, that had had to be. I mean, you may have known the Porters then
Yes.
from when you lived out there.
From Pepperwood, I knew the Porters, and
Yeah. So.
and then I ended up since Mrs. Van Noy, they found she and Mrs. Porter later on found their bodies down around Fernbridge, but her brother was Mrs. Van Noy's brother was a major in the Army, and he had come up, and Munski Logging had furnished some equipment. They were from Myers Flat. They had furnished some equipment to look through the hotel to try to see if they could find their bodies. And I drove him out for about 3 days, every day in the Jeep, and was there and helping them trying to find their bodies. So.
Could you tell a little bit more about what was going on at the fairgrounds when you were out there?
Well, that was mainly the center where they had a lot of people put up in the different buildings there. And that too was where the Coast Guard helicopter that had picked up the Lorenz family during the high water at the south end of Fernbridge itself. And they were trying to get them to land when it was storming, to land there at the fairgrounds. But the helicopter never got quite on the ground, and it lifted off and headed north. And that helicopter ended up crashed up above Trinidad and killed everyone on board. And I ended up going up there for a couple of days looking for that helicopter. But they finally found it later on. And
yeah, it took them a long time to find it.
Yes.
We just know from the news, but reading the newspapers, it took a while for them to find it.
Right. It took them, I think, 3 or 4 days before they finally found it.
And let's see. Could you talk a little bit about Ruth and Bridgeville and what was going on up there?
Okay. Our first sergeant and I, we had 2 of the 2.5-ton trucks. And I had mail, and I had groceries, and he had groceries and diesel fuel. And they wanted us to deliver mail to Bridgeville and some supplies, and then take the rest of the supplies to the Ruth store. So we went out 36, and the first bridge that was out was at what they call 13-mile bridge. So we took what they call Redwood House Ranch Road, which went up to Neyland Road, and there was snow up there at that time, and we worked our way around, got into Bridgeville, and dropped off mail at the store, and my aunt was there. She helped at the post office. And we dropped off mail and some supplies there. Then we made our way out 36 up to Ruth Road. We got just below the dam, and there was a helicopter parked in the middle of the road, military helicopter. Nobody around, so we had to wait there about 1.5 hours till they finally came down. They'd been up to Ruth's store or something. And so then they finally took off, and then we were able to get up to Ruth's store and deliver supplies. And then we came back Neyland Road and back to the armory. But that was like from 5 o'clock in the morning till midnight that night. It took us just to, go that little ways.
And was it really storming that whole time?
It wasn't then, but there'd been a lot of snow right after some of the heavy rains we had, so we had to basically kind of fight the snow to, get up there and to get back.
That's one of the interesting things that's come up about the flood is that it really wasn't the snow melt that caused the rivers to rise. It really was all this moisture coming in and raining, but then it did start to snow later, like after, some of the flooding happened, then it started to snow, which actually helped because then it was collecting rather than running down and causing problems. So it sounds like you experienced some of that snow later on in the
Yes.
storm.
There was some snow just prior to the warm rains, but when the warm rains come in, and I think they had figures like they had 8 inches in 24 hours in the Garberville area, and 6 inches in some of the other areas during a 24-hour period. So that's a lot of water, to come down at once. And that's why we had such a rapid rise in, all of the rivers.
Yeah, it's that whole cumulative, it's not just, raining in one spot, it's raining all over that whole region and just all dumping into the river and
That's
building
right.
up there. Let's see.
I might add that speaking of that amount of water, the Eel River at the peak of the flood was putting out something like 1 million cubic feet per second, and the Mississippi runs about that during a normal flow. So that's just tells you the amount of volume of water.
Let's see. Let's talk about the Bennington. You actually saw the Bennington.
Yes, I was on guard duty at Table Bluff. Sheriff's Department had furnished us a car with a radio, and we were trying to keep people from going down to the beaches to pick up. They were picking up the cattle that had drowned and washed up on the beaches, so they wanted to keep people out of there. So stormed really hard that night, wind blew, and the next morning got daybreak, and I happened to look out towards the ocean there from Table Bluff, and here was this huge aircraft carrier coming in real close to the bay, and all of these helicopters were lifting off, and they were flying to Murray Field and to Arcata Airport, and it was just really quite a sight to see. So that was when they brought in, the majority of the helicopters to help with, relief work.
And that had to be a really good feeling to see that.
It was just awesome to see, being right there and looking out and seeing, here's help coming, and which we really needed at the time.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, I got a lot of the notes that I took, but I'm going to give you your notes and see if there's if there's something else on your list that.
I think I would like to just mention some of the damage that I saw. And our district was District 1 for Division of Highways at the time. And that consisted of Del Norte, Trinity, Humboldt, Mendocino, Lake, and part of Trinity County. And in our district at that time, we had lost 18 bridges, which really, that impacted, trying to get supplies into the area and getting, people out. So basically, our transportation mode at the time was airplanes and through the bay, through either, boats or barges or whatever. So, and those bridges weren't easy to, a lot of those areas weren't easy to replace right away. And that's where the National Guard, our National Guard unit, ran a ferry at Klamath because that bridge had gone out. And they ran that ferry, which, helped get transportation in from up north and into this area. And then there was some, our National Guard unit was familiar with putting up what they call Bailey bridges, and which were little truss single lane bridges. And they ended up using some of those bridges, although the National Guard never got involved with it, to fill in some of the places where some of our bridges were lost. And those you could put up, within 2 or 3 days and get at least one lane of traffic through.
That's good that you had that contingency, because it just seems like, all these areas where our population is spread out so far over Humboldt County.
That's right.
Hard to get things to them.
And then I I was on guard duty at the airport at McKinleyville for about a week. And they brought in a local guy that worked at the San Francisco International Airport in the tower. They brought him in, and he ran the tower at McKinleyville at the time, and he said at the time we had more air traffic in and out of McKinleyville than they had at San Francisco International Airport at a quiet time. So it really helped to bring people in that knew the area, and seeing too, the military brought in what they call these caribous. They were kind of like a small cargo military plane, and they brought those in, and they hauled a lot of supplies and hay stuff inland to cattle ranches and supplies to a lot of the outlying areas. And a lot of the what they call the Flying Tiger Airlines was hauling in supplies and stuff too, and other airlines like that were bringing a lot of supplies into McKinleyville Airport.
Okay, that's great. I want to make sure you check your battery, and because remember it was like, and when you have the viewfinder open, it runs down faster. Do you see the battery amount left on the battery?
Battery level?
Battery level,
It's
okay.
down, but
Does
it says
give you a amount
29
of time?
more minutes.
Okay, we're in good shape. But just all of a sudden I started having this moment of going,
No,
what if we run out of battery right in the middle of this?
It looks
As long as
bad,
we're
but
good.
it says 29 more
29 minutes, I'm good with 29.
It's funny, our
Can I
last
ask you-
interviewee mentioned that the heaviest traffic in the country was O'Hare
Yeah.
Airport, and this beat O'Hare.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jim, I wanted to ask you, but you have to keep looking at Jennifer.
Right.
But you said you knew Albert and Florence Porter, and also Althea Van Noy that was killed, were drowned in the flood. Did you know Dr. Brooke and his wife Regina and their son Kelly?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
Just wondering about that because you didn't mention them.
Yeah,
There
but
were 5 people killed there. I mean, they all went across to Althea Van Noy's restaurant, and because they kind of thought that was high ground, but then the water went over.
that's
the
right.
roof of it.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, I'm looking back at your notes. You've got good notes here now that I can figure them out. So one of the things that you put here is plugged culverts, saturated slopes, erosion, loss of slope protection, undermining, overtopping. Is that
Yeah,
engineering word?
right.
So if you could talk about that a little bit, about how did the flood kind of undermine the system of transportation in Humboldt County?
Okay. A lot of our culverts in our mountainous areas, they come across and they've got down drains on them, which go down the outside of the slopes of the fills. And so much rain at one time, a lot of debris and bed load built up in those culverts and maybe blew those down drains off. Then it just was like a waterfall. Then that water was just eroding away those fills, and then the culvert would collapse, pieces would fall off, and then next thing you know, that whole section of road was gone. And then a lot of the areas where we had rock slope protection, they called it, along the rivers and creeks that protected the bottom of the roadways or the fills. A lot of that rock slope protection worked fine, except when the water got high enough to overtop that rock slope protection, then the water got in behind, washed out that big rock, and then eroded away the fills. And so a lot of the damage was caused by those drainage facilities, and we learned a lot from that too, that Caltrans, or Division of Highways, tried at the time, instead of maybe putting in a cross drain with a long down drain on it, you put the culverts in at a steep slope and put protection in for the bottom of the culvert, and that way you didn't have to worry about the down drains, failing. And so
Good. Learning is good.
it is expensive but good.
So speaking of expensive, it was an expensive event as well as everything else. you have a figure here in today's dollars, but that was how many years ago? You said 300 million.
That was 300 million, and that was in $94. So you could probably add, another 30% to that, being it's 20 years from that time. So
Say the whole sentence about
Yeah.
the expense of the
Yeah, so maybe I'll just have you say a sentence about, well, what do you think it would cost in today's dollars to deal with an event the size of the 64 flood?
in today's dollars, I would say that the damage in our district at the time would probably be close to $400 million.
Great, he did the math like because he's an engineer. Good. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Do you want to talk about some of the work that you did after the, a little while after the flood that you did in Eastern Humboldt?
Okay, National Guard, they released me around the first part of February, and so then I went out on storm damage surveys for Division of Highways. And we went to Willow Creek, where they had lost the bridge at Willow Creek that accessed Hoopaw on Highway 96 there, and we surveyed that for damage. And then they ended up in the Smith River Canyon, where we'd lost probably 3 or 4 bridges along Route 199 from Crescent City up towards Cave Junction. And we ended up on storm damage surveys, and that was where we found out that a lot of the rock slope protection I talked about, water had topped over it and then washed in behind it. And in some areas there'd be like 500 feet of roadway was completely gone. And so it ended up, after we did that, I ended up on the Pepperwood Freeway, which we had to go in and resurvey all of that because there was some places there was like 8 to 10 feet of sediment deposited in areas where we were supposed to, build the freeway. And so that affected our quantities. And so we had to go in and resurvey that.
So when you have that much silt, you have to remove that and get back down to original ground, is that right?
Not all of it. You have to at least take the top, couple feet off and then compact it. But it's pretty much sediment like that with the water that it was so saturated with that when that water drains out, it pretty much compacts itself.
That's true, because that silt is pretty fine.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so you ended up down there in Pepperwood.
Yes.
You want to talk some more about that?
Back there, it was just I was born in Eureka and raised at Pepperwood until 1944. So I knew a lot of people, and that's where some of our family, Holmes Flat area lived. And so it was just really mind-boggling to see the damage that was done. But to be right back down that area, where I was raised, and to be, building a new road and repairing everything was really felt good, and did.
Yeah, put it back together again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good. It's sometimes some of the people we talk to tell stories of people who that was it. They just got up and left and didn't want to ever see anything, have anything to do with it, the area again.
There was a lot of people that I knew that wanted to move back into Holmes Flat and Pepperwood area, but of course they, kind of county through their planning department and so forth kind of said, well, no, let's take a closer look at this, and if you do, maybe on just a temporary basis, or if you do build again, build above, what the high water was.
You'd have to have some big stilts down there.
That's
to put
right.
your house on. Because I was talking to Ginger Sarvinsky. They've got a place down there, and I said, "Oh, do you live here year round?" She goes, "No, the county won't let us live here year round. They have a motorhome, and they just park it down there in the summer and do their they have a farm.
Farm their vegetables and
Well, I think that's one of the things when you think of that area. It's like the soil is really rich but there's a reason why it's really rich. It's, that is a constant process, the flood.
Yeah, because when I was raised in Pepperwood, there was times my dad worked for Division of Highways maintenance at the time, and I can remember there'd be some high water and they'd come up near the house that we lived in, and Dad would tie the rowboat up to the porch just in case we needed it to get out. But it was always constantly that water would come up and deposit that sediment, which made ideal places for them to grow their produce down there.
It's a natural thing.
Yes.
Let's see if there's some other things in your notes that we want to.
Can I ask one follow-up?
Sure.
And you can answer to Jen when you're ready. So we assume there's going to be other floods coming, and one of the things we've talked about in this project is what kind of information gets lost over time. The previous generations learn things, and perhaps with new technology we forget some older lessons. Is there anything as an old school engineer you would pass on to new engineers coming through to deal with another flood?
I would recommend to them to look back and check to make sure when you're building a new project, to look back and see what history has given us. And example, the '64 flood, we've got recorded high water levels, and then you look at, all right, there's 50-year, 100-year floods, 1,000-year floods, and make sure you take that into consideration when you're designing a new facility. And just like we learned, I would look back to and look at some of the older jobs that we did back then and see what we used for hydraulic means, culverts, rock slope protection, whatever. And but not to just take it on your own, but look back in history and see. And we've got that stuff available to us. I've a weather spotter now with the Weather Service over here at the marina, and the Water Resources group over there, they have data they were showing me that they collected that would really help, engineers building new roads, dams, whatever. So don't be afraid to dig up old history.
I think that's a good idea. One of the things that's come up as we've talked to people about the flood is that maybe because so many people in Humboldt County work with their hands, they're farmers or fishermen, they're hardworking people, and that maybe because of that, Humboldt County fared better than it might have had it been a big city somewhere and had a similar sort of experience. What are your thoughts about that?
That's a good point, Jennifer. Just looking back, and I want to say one thing about our district director for Division of Highways at the time, Sam Helwer. And he sent the people out to these areas, and I mean they had to fly some of them in by helicopter and so forth, but sent them out and told them, said, I want you to go out, and if John Doe here has a Caterpillar or a tractor or a loader or a dump truck, I want you to get him and get him out there, getting the road open, and to utilize all of the available, equipment and people that we had. And they're people that knew the area. So that's basically what we did. And you didn't have to worry about all of the environmental things at the time. They said, we'll worry about that later. The thing is to get the transportation system open so you can take care of the people and get supplies in and so forth. So I see there that a lot of the locals with their expertise, and they knew maybe you needed some heavy rock to put in, fill in a place or protect something. Those people knew, said, oh yeah, there's a quarry, rock quarry right over here, and I can get that for you. And so we did a lot of that in utilizing the local expertise. And I think you take a urban area and a lot of people wouldn't know maybe where to go get something or whatever. So
how to run the equipment or
Yes.
how to fix it when it breaks, etc.
Jennifer, I just lost the battery.
You did. Okay.
It's
Still
it said,
blinking, but
said a lot more, but it
I think
disappeared.
what happens is when you have the viewfinder open, it burns the battery faster. When you have it closed and are just using that.
Is that what you just said a little while ago?
Sounds
I
familiar.
did. But
I'm shutting
that's
it down.
okay. Do you want to?
After they'd had dinner and then somebody had TV on, he heard this guy say something about the killer eel river. And he said, "That's my neighbor," he says. And that was my extent of my TV career.
2 seconds of fame.
Yes,
Literally
yeah.
was 2 seconds.
But they interviewed me for about a half an hour, and I got the biggest kick out of that. But then they sent me a copy of that episode, and there was very little about San Francisco north, and then it jumped clear to Oregon, and then on up the coast.
Planet drops off there.
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
And I thought,
Viewership drops off.
yes.
Well, great. Let's see. Is there anything else that let's see. You guys have any questions? Maybe I missed something?
Unless you just want to sum up anything else you're feeling
Yeah.
about the flood.
Any other stories
other-
that you heard about the flood?
You get me going. I could go on and on and on. No, I hauled, when I was in the National Guard, I also hauled in supplies to build a temporary school at Requa. And here, the National Guard unit here wanted me to help run the ferry that they put in on the Klamath. And they wanted me to stay in Oric, which there wasn't much of anything left in Oric to stay in. But I told them, I said, I had a choice. And I told them, no, I said, I prefer not doing that. So here I come through with a 2.5 ton loaded with building supplies for temporary school at Requa. And here's the guys giving me a bad time about using their ferry to get across the Klamath River. But and I just might add too of what all the National Guard did here at the time to help people, and just really those guys actually put their lives on the line. A lot of the things that they did, and I really respect them for that. And I also just feel that the people at Division of Highways too at the time did a tremendous job of getting the roads open, getting the transportation system back up and running.
I know when you think about it, and it's like in the worst possible weather, in the worst possible situation, that's when that group of people, PG&E, the phone company, everybody's like, okay, now go on out there and fix it so we can have our life back again.
Yeah, speaking of utilities, one of the magazines that we had showed the PG&E trucks south of Fortuna putting up power lines, putting poles back up and getting power lines back up. And I hauled a large Caterpillar down, a bulldozer down there, so that we could open up the road for them to get in. But just working, like you said, with utility companies, PG&E, telephone company, and being able to help them too, to be able to get in and get power and telephone service, so forth, in too, was just remarkable. Just everybody working together.
One of the things I was thinking of when you were talking about taking your truck over Fern Bridge was you must have come over where that whole area in there had been newly paved. That was a new highway there that had paved that year.
Yes, and that section of road, when I went up, took the truck up, started up there by the creamery on top of the Fern Bridge, the first abutment right there, I hit a real bad bump, kind of shook the truck and went on across, and then down the other side they were starting to haul gravel in. They had a lot of gravel stockpiled by Angelina Inn, and they were starting to use it to fill in the holes on the south side of Fern Bridge. But all of that new road that had been paved there the year before, there were just big chunks of road gone, and I had to drop the truck down into those holes and everything. So when I came back, brought the first people out of Ferndale, I hit that bump again up at the north abutment of Fern Bridge. So the maintenance foreman for Division of Highways was over there by the store, so I went over and I told him. So we walked up there, and we looked, and there was a big section of pavement that had collapsed, probably about a 3-foot diameter hole, and you could hear water down in there. Well, he went and got a big beam light, and we shined it down in there. And of course, those piers for Fern Bridge are sand filled. They're concrete on the outside. Well, that abutment, we looked, and a log had come down and had poked a hole in the side of that abutment, broke the concrete. And here, as the water was going down, it was sucking sand out of that, inside that pier. So right away, they ended up, broke that hole open a little more, and ended up got some gravel in there. And but that's just kind of things that you found when, when you were trying to get places at the time.
Well, and I think people think of Fern Bridge and they're like, well, it went through the '64 flood. Well, it's not like it went through unscathed,
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That bridge has been through a lot, and it's just amazing. Now there's a engineering feat in its own right there that, it's survived many high waters, 54, 55, so.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, great.
Do you want to check on any snake stories?
Oh, yeah. Any snakes? Any rattlesnakes? Did you see any rattlesnakes down there?
I didn't, but we found some of the contractors were removing debris, like at the Robinson Ferry Bridge there, south of Fortuna, south of Alton. And they ended up found rattlesnakes in that debris, and said they had to be very careful. Of course, the rattlesnakes weren't real active since they were cold and so forth. But I'd heard stories too of people seeing rabbits, cottontails, and so forth sitting on logs that were coming down the Eel River, and just all kinds of things you normally don't see like that, except situation like that.
And one of the things I think that is that caused a lot of the problem with the debris buildup was the log deck had broken up river of that.
At the time when we left Stafford, and I was talking about the debris building up in the structure, the bridge there, and a lot of that came from log decks at Myers Flat, different places like that had washed out. Even PL, a lot of their lumber and their log decks too was picked up and brought down the river. And that's where we lost a lot of the bridges, was because of debris. Some of the bridges on Highway 36 were concrete arch bridges and got debris hung up in that concrete arch, and eventually it was just too heavy for it and took the bridges out. And it was amazing sometime after the flood, how much lumber from some of those mills was deposited along old Copenhagen Road down in the lower part of the Eel River Valley there, down below Lolita. And I mean, just, thousands, millions of dollars worth of lumber, and they end up salvaged a lot of that, so.
Yeah, I've heard that there were people who were hired to go out and collect some of that wood.
Right.
Yeah. I know what you're saying about the bridges being knocked out because of the arches. It's just so hard to imagine the water. I mean, you think about water hitting the bridge, wood hitting the bridge. You're thinking about the bottom of the bridge. You're not thinking about the arches of the bridge.
That's right. These arch bridges that we had on 36 were concrete arches underneath the deck of the bridge. So you think, oh, gee whiz, the water didn't get up to the deck, but it brought enough debris in on those arches. It was the same way with the bridge at South Scotia. Steel arch steel girders underneath the bridge deck, but then that's where the debris, lodged and eventually took out the bridges. Now, the bridge at Dyerville, there was debris was building up in that, and there was a maintenance guy that went over the side of the bridge during the high water with ropes and put dynamite in there, and they blew that debris loose, and they said that when that debris broke up and went underneath the bridge, you could actually see the deck of the 4-lane bridge raise up as that went out, and basically he saved that bridge.
Wow, that's quite a feat. Dangling from ropes with the dynamite, blow it up. Yay.
That's right.
Yeah, like you said,
Yes.
what they did was very brave.
Yeah.
And you just, something people don't think of immediately when they think about the 64 flood. So
That's right.
It's a great story. Well, good. Yeah.
Okay.
Before OSHA, right?
Yeah, before
That's
OSHA.
right. You didn't pay any attention to OSHA or environmental groups at the time, and if we did, we wouldn't have had it open to this day. So, and I hope they hear that.
We'll send that
Yes.
copy to them. Yeah.